Hello and welcome to this webinar on Beyond TRIFR, creating meaningful and measurable lead indicators for safety. Taking you through your presentation today is me, Anthony Gibbs, and I'm the CEO of Centis. And what we do at Centis is we have a mission to change the lives of individuals and organizations for the better every day. We do that through the application of psychology and neuroscience to help increase leadership capability, create team connectedness to safety, and also to help organizations understand their drivers, both helpful and hindering, around safety culture. And this particular topic on moving beyond TRIFR and leading beyond lag indicators is a big part of the conversation that we're having with our client base at the moment. So it's a great opportunity for us to have a conversation about how we approach this. So it's quite a big topic we're going to cover off today. We're going to cover off the topic in 4 key stages. We're first of all going to have a look at create an understanding of what are lead and lag indicators through an overview of lead and lag indicators. We're going to look at some of the current challenges attached to measures within organizations. We'll also talk a little bit about what good looks like, and then we'll give you some hints and tips about where to start on your reviewing of metrics within your organization. So we've run this webinar a couple of times live, and this is obviously a recording that you're watching now. So what we thought we'd share with you throughout this is some of the insights that we were able to gather from the groups that we've connected with so far. So one of the questions we asked as part of the previous webinars that we've run is, how does your organization measure safety success? So it's worth reflecting on that for yourself. So we got individuals to type in their feedback into the chat, and the response to how does your organization measure safety success was broken down into the following categories. So unsurprisingly, incident rate was 58%. That was how most organizations who were on the webinar viewed that. Coming in second was, as you can see here, 11 as lead indicators. We also had audit results come through quite strongly. Hazard reporting came through quite strongly, and then you had claim and injury rates. So the key takeaway from this data is that only about 11% of organizations that attended our webinars previously focused on lead indicators as one of the key measures of success around safety. There's still quite a significant focus on lag indicators in terms of safety performance. So we sought through the webinars to dig a little bit deeper and understand a bit more about how organizations were experiencing lag indicators. So we ran a poll, and the poll that we ran asked the question more directly: how much of a focus does your organization put on lead indicators? So not only is it the key measure of success, but how much of your organization's focus goes on to those? And what came through was, again, fairly unsurprising. So we had 14% of organizations said, no, we don't even talk about it, there's no focus. We had 50% of organizations said some, there's a couple of conversations going around, or maybe we're dabbling a little bit in it. However, not a whole lot. 29%, quite a lot. So there's obviously a chunk of organizations and a movement happening to focus on this. And then 7%, which is saying it's our key focus. So we are seeing, I guess, a gradual transition through this data to people focusing on this idea of lead indicators. And it's a big topic. And if you go through and you look at any of the safety stuff on LinkedIn, or you look at any discussion forums or whatever the case may be, there's huge amounts of opinion and hugely different perspectives around the idea of lead and lag indicators and what we should be focusing on and why. In fact, it's a big can of worms. Certainly when I spoke to a number of my peers about talking about this topic, they told me your game. Because obviously there's people with really strong opinions around zero harm, really strong opinions around lead and lag indicators, and quite often people take very strong positions in either camp and don't look to meet in the middle. I guess what we're trying to convey through this webinar today is somewhat of a pragmatic approach to understanding this idea of lead and lag indicators and how that data can be analysed and assessed. And the reality is no one's come up with the single one answer and the silver bullet to addressing this particular issue. So what we'll be looking at doing is working through a set of steps to consider for yourself and for your organisation as you look at metrics across your business. Want to kick off by tackling this idea of zero harm. because it is such a big topic being discussed in a number of different forums at the moment. And the question is zero harm inherently bad? So let's tackle that. Now, zero harm, there are some fairly unhelpful aspects of it. So a zero harm and a lag indicator focus has created a culture of late where you're driving towards a focus on reducing incidents. Now, that is often attached to incentives and a punishment and reward system for organizations. Now, what that has meant is that for many organizations, that focus on zero has driven an underreporting culture and a drive to manipulate metrics and how data and lag data is reported within organizations. We all know that the easiest way to reduce your safety incident rates is to manage them in different ways. So there's some unhelpful things attached to zero around that. What we also know is that focusing on zero or focusing on the absence of something doesn't empower someone in a way. So what we're telling our workforce is we're telling our workforce that go out there and don't get hurt. It's a bit like if you're teaching someone to drive. You're focusing on what you don't want as opposed to what you do want. If you say to someone, don't hit the gutter, don't hit the gutter, don't hit the gutter, our brains aren't very good at hearing the don't. So all they hear is hit the gutter. So you're better off, from a psychological perspective, focusing on what you want as opposed to what you don't want is much more empowering and more engaging for individuals. As I sort of started to mention earlier, there's real danger in focusing on zero harm, particularly when there's a strong reward and recognition system attached to it. There's many different scenarios where this plays out. So where we've got a focus on lag indicators and bonuses tied to lag indicators, manipulating data, burying incidents, underreporting, all of those things are a potential implication of that. And that means that we're not necessarily getting the data we need to manage potential incidents into the future. Another big challenge attached to this is how do you stay motivated once you've had an incident? So let's imagine you've exceeded your threshold for lost time injuries. The money's removed for that. What do we do? How do we manage that? And then finally, what we know is that using lag data as an external benchmark isn't always that helpful. A lot of organizations are very obsessed with saying, well, our LTI is this compared to industry or compared to other organizations. And what we'd suggest is that it's not helpful because different organizations will often categorize incidents in different ways. So you might not be comparing apples and apples. And finally, on top of this, even if you do have a low injury frequency rate, it doesn't mean that you're safe. And we certainly know that that if you have a significant incident on site and you end up in legal proceedings, your past incident frequency rates have no real bearing to the case at hand. So these are all the current challenges with zero harm. Now, a pragmatic look at this is, zero harm had its place a number of years ago when we were starting the safety movement, where we were saying, right, we're no longer going to tolerate incidents in the workforce. But because of the interpretation that's been put around zero harm, because of the rhetoric that's been put around zero harm, because of the way that we as leaders and organizations have interpreted and put reward and punishment systems around zero harm, I think for a number of organizations, it is now transitioned into an unhelpful space. So it's worth reflecting for your organization, particularly if you've got a zero harm focus. Are any of these factors in play for you within your organization? And is the focus of zero harm, as well-intentioned as it might be, driving the results that you're hoping to achieve within your organization? Now, that's the idea of zero harm. But if we then tie this back to the idea of lag indicators, are lag indicators themselves inherently bad, and are lag indicators something that we need to completely move away from within organizations? And as it's got on the screen here, what we're going to suggest is that despite the challenges attached to lag indicators, they're a benchmark that a number of organisations use to measure themselves for now. And what we're going to really question is, actually, should we move away from lag indicators altogether? And what would be the consequence if we did move away from lag indicators? What we'd really encourage organisations to consider when it comes to lag indicators is maybe not necessarily focus on moving away from them, but to instead think about, well, what story can we gather, or what story does our lag indicator data tell us that enables us to effectively set up lead indicators, to effectively set up strategies to intervene to see an impact on these particular items. So, things like having TRIFR and near misses and high potential incidents understood. I think they're hygiene metrics that organisations need to gather. However, we'd be challenging organisations to really think about, well, what is this data telling us? How do these bits of information play in together? If things are trending upwards or trending downwards, why? And what can we do about either maintaining the positive trend, or if it's not trending in the right direction, starting a positive trend. And I think it's important to question both pieces of data, because we want to be able to draw causation between proactive activities we're taking and the types of outcomes we're getting in the organisation. So to flesh this out in a little bit more detail, we'll talk a little bit now about lag indicators in action. So in action look like. So firstly, what story do your lag indicators tell you? What has gone wrong and what has gone right? So what we'd be challenging you to think about is, how are the activities attached to the metric going to help people stay safer and manage unplanned events? So, for example, you're having a range of different injuries across the site. Are they all the same? So you might have a category of injuries which are lost time injuries. What we'd be really encouraging you to do is dig into those lost time injuries and understand, well, what is the potential? Not only the severity, but what is the potential attached to those injuries? And then what are the circumstances around those injuries? Look at your incident data, and then look at, well, are there any trends or themes we can find across that information that we can start to put proactive measures or actions into place to address those? The next item is, how can the information be used to manage future risks? So again, feeding into that, if we can start to do longitudinal incident analysis and understand what's happened in our incidents across organisations, then we can look at the trends and put in those mitigating factors. Another big part of this is, if an incident does occur, or we're seeing a trend of incidents occur, how do we use that as a vehicle to problem solve with the workforce and then communicate lessons learned? So what's our opportunity to engage and work with the work group? I guess what I'd also really encourage organisations to think about is, if you are experiencing a drop in lag indicators, the same sort of methodology can be applied. So as opposed to maybe an incident and investigation, what's an after action review that you can apply to look at, well, why was that work successful and how do we replicate that success into the future? Then finally, once you've got this story around lag indicators together, we can start to really think about what lead indicators need to be implemented to ensure better and consistent outcomes in the future. So if lag indicators are only one part of the puzzle, how do we see the full picture? Well, what we'd be suggesting is that a focus on lead indicators or inputs into the system that people can control or influence is the key. So again, lag indicators, lost time injuries, all these things that have already happened aren't particularly empowering, because they don't tell people the things that we need them to be doing or thinking or engaging with to help get themselves and other people home safe. Now, if this all makes so much sense, and if this is a general challenge throughout industry that we're all trying to solve, why isn't there an established industry set of standards for lead indicators? And it's a big question, and a lot of it's based on the way that we think about solving problems in business. and in safety. One of the big things is it's very difficult often to provide straight line causation between a lead indicator and a lag indicator. And we certainly at Centres experience this a lot. So we've built leadership capability here, and it just so happens that safety performance has improved over here. However, it's difficult to draw specific direct lines often between the two, which mean that this increase in capability capacity here can be directly, there can be shown causation between the two. Often there's correlation, but it's difficult to find causation. And that's difficult for organizations to grapple with, and it's often difficult for us to come up with hypotheses about, well, okay, well, we think that if we do more of this based on the data that we've gathered, it's going to help to create these controls there. What we're also finding is that a number of organizations will find that it's difficult to then track those lead indicators, and there's a lot more effort required to be put into that. And then finally, the last one is, although there's a suite of lag indicators that industry generally accepts, what we know is that because of the operational factors and strategies and strategies of organizations, risk profiles and the work done can look very different. So in fact, the lead indicators that many organizations would have to implement are going to look different based on the work they're doing, their strategy, their risk profile, and where they're at in terms of the maturity curve. So it's very difficult for a number of organizations, and it's very difficult for industry to pick up a set of metrics and apply them holus bolus across every business and every industry. So what we'd be really encouraging organizations to do is, again, get behind the data that you've currently got, dig into it deeper, seek to understand it with greater depth, really use your board as a mechanism to challenge. The role of the board should be to really challenge and dig in behind that data and see what story it's telling. And then look at the gaps. What gaps do we have in the data, and how do we get that information? And then once we've got that information, how do we use that information to set up some really strong lead indicators within the business? And what we'd be suggesting is that when you're thinking about lead indicators, think about some of these things. The first one is, don't get stuck in the debate of, is something a lead or a lag indicator? So some people will say, all right, well, let's imagine we're using in-field conversations by leaders with team members around critical risk as a lead indicator. Well, if we're tracking that after it's already been done, isn't that actually a lag indicator? So we can really tie ourselves in knots around whether things are lead or lag indicators. So a way that we encourage you to simply think about this is, instead of thinking about lead and lag indicators in sense of time, maybe think about lead and lag indicators in sense of, I guess, types of activity that you want people to engage in. So we generally think about lag indicators as things you want to see, you want to have a negative effect on. You want to see decrease. So you want to have less injuries. You want to have less insurance claims. You want to have a reduction in these factors. Lag indicators are things that we want to see more of, with the goal of reducing those lag indicators. So we want to see a positive effect on those. So we might want to see more time in field. We might want to see more near-miss reporting. We might want to see more safety, more suggestions on how to improve safety. We might want to see more collaboration between teams or departments around how to get jobs done safely. So I guess think about lead indicators as positive, trending up, and lag indicators as negative, tracking down. The next step would be, as much as possible, think about how you can keep it simple. So how do you leverage current metrics and limit the new metrics to one or two at a time to enable people to get used to them? So if you are moving down the lead indicator space, think about, based on what your lag indicator data is telling you, where do you think the greatest opportunity, just one or two things that you can empower individuals towards. And it might be that those one or two things might look different across different work groups, different teams in your business. You might have maintenance that have a couple different lead indicators to production, for example, depending on the industry and the organization that you're in. The next one is metrics should drive action. So reflect on what the metric means and what would change if you did or didn't improve it. So, for example, maybe increased supervision on particular types of work is a lead indicator that you put into place. What would you expect to change as a result of that? So what would your measure of success in the implementation of that lead indicator be? So how are you going to track it? What would success look like? Next one, make it measurable and review it regularly. So as you're setting these up, think about how you're going to measure these lead indicators and how you're going to track their performance. And this ties into the next element. How do you keep it visible? So how do you know whether you're winning or losing? People are executing on what they're achieving. That the lead indicators, the effort that's going into those lead indicators is actually resulting in the type of impact that you want to see. And celebrating those success becomes really important. Just going back to measuring those lead indicators, there's a difference in the types of lead indicators that you can measure. So you can measure quantity of things, and that's where a number of organizations go, and you can also measure capacity or quality-based metrics as well. And it might be about meeting your organization where it's at. Like, let's say, for example, in-field leader supervision, if I use that metric as an ongoing theme throughout this, if you were to take that as an example, you might focus on just getting the leaders out in the field for the start, but then over time you might focus on the quality of that intervention for the organization. So like how effective a leader's been at transitioning those conversations, how effective are leaders at making sure that they're creating the behavior change that they want to see. If we just step outside of maybe industry and we think about a broader aspect that is affecting us all, we could potentially even look at the way that the government is tackling COVID in Australia and a number of different areas. So if you think about how that's been measured, you've got some lag indicators that are attached to that. So you've got lag indicators like infection rates, deaths, hospitalizations. There's a range of different lag indicators there. Now, how do we shift that lag indicator? Well, we need to focus on, well, what are the positive behaviors that we can put into place? So you've got testing. So basically that's reporting. So understanding where the infections are. You've got tracking. So understanding how the virus is being is progressing through community, so we can put some controls into place. So you've got some of those sorts of elements, but then you've also got capacity type things as well. So what we know is that vaccinations are a positive thing that can be done in order to reduce the lag effect of COVID. But in order for those to effectively come into play, we obviously need to have the capacity to for people to get those immunizations. So there's one thing to encourage people to do it, but then we also need to create the capacity within the system to be able to support that. So it's about, again, thinking about what's the interplay of all of these different factors to ensure that we're achieving the outcomes that we want to see. So further considerations in developing lead indicators. So we need to understand what's the gap in our lag indicator data, what are the gaps in the story, what do our incident tell us, what are the common weak signals. So again, if we would do that incident analysis, are there any trends or themes or the types of circumstances that have led to those that we can track and address proactively? Dig into, I guess, the knowledge within the workforce. What are your people telling you? what are the perceptions of leaders and systems and safety, and are you measuring quality? Are you ready to measure quality? So do you have the basics right in order to set up your organization to measure for success? So along this line, how do we set up for success? What are the steps that we really need to consider in driving a new safety focus and a focus on lead indicators throughout your organization? Well, we'd encourage you to think about the following steps. So there's a number of cultural drivers that are firstly going to impact how successfully you can transition into lead indicators. Firstly, our research, and you can download Driving a Positive Safety Culture, shows that organizations that are more mature in the safety space generally have a clearer safety/organizational vision that is communicated well by leadership. So where are we going, and do we have our leaders aligned around this? We generally find that you've got stronger leader engagement in safety and stronger leadership capabilities. So again, if we're going to ask leaders to lead indicators, we need to make sure that they're on board with it and they've got the capability to do so. We need to make sure that we've got the right systems in place to support people to do what they need to do. And we also need to carefully consider our reward and recognition systems. So we really do need to be wary, as we mentioned in those earlier slides, about having reward systems tied to lag indicators. What we'd really be encouraging you to consider further, so that we're moving beyond this compliance culture, is there a way, if we need to have a reward system, that we can have those reward systems set up to support the lead indicator behaviors that we want to see more of? So maybe it's more values-based or more positive safety behavior-based values. What we also need to consider is that when it comes to lead indicators in particular, and as we instill new habits within organizations, understanding where you're at in your maturity, in your maturity curve is important. As you can see up here in our maturity curve, you can have organizations that are in the counterproductive space, actively working against safety and seen it as a barrier to getting the job done, through to citizenship, people seeing safety as a shared responsibility. Understanding where you're at will help you to target the type of lead indicators that are going to be best for you at any given point in time. And at the moment, you might just be focusing on creating habits, getting people engaged in the right activities. But as you move up the maturity curve, really focusing on the quality and the impact of those activities and making sure you've got the capacity within leaders and within the workforce to use those lead indicators effectively becomes very, very important. So what we suggest at Centis is that you need to, again, understand where you're at, and what we typically encourage organizations to aim for over time is a focus on safety citizenship. So what this looks at is moving beyond basic compliance to people actually buying in and understanding the why and the what's in it for me with safety. It focuses on really strongly on focusing on identifying opportunities to improve safety and facilitating environments and circumstances where people can put those ideas forward. You've got a big focus on willingness to discuss safety concerns with leaders and teammates. So again, that open two-way communication, voluntary membership of safety committees, willingness to actively engage in safety initiatives. We encourage organizations and leaders to keep informed about the latest safety changes on site and communicate those effectively across the group. And then monitoring safety performance of team members to ensure everyone is working safely. So they're the high level things we'd really encourage organizations to consider as they're moving through and looking at measuring lead indicators around safety. So a little bit more context, a little bit more thinking around this. So we've got a list of lead indicators on the screen here, because that's typically what we'd be asked for. But to step through these lead indicators, what we'd really encourage you to think about is, firstly, what is the goal? So what are you trying to achieve when it comes to implementing lead indicators within your organizations, and get really zero in on that as clearly as you can. Once you're clear about the goal of your lead indicators, then you can start to identify, well, what do we think, or what do we hypothesize are the behaviors or the activities that are going to have the most meaningful impact on that, and then set up a way of rolling out and putting those key behaviors into place. Keep a scoreboard, track how you're performing against not only achieving the targeted activities or behaviors, but also how is that impacting on the goal that you're trying to achieve. And then finally, create a cadence of accountability. So look at how are you going to measure, track, and hold leaders and team members to account in order to drive and address these new lead indicators that you've put into place. So to tie all of this together, what we'd really be encouraging you to think about is, and to consider is, firstly, how do you reward safety, and is it helpful or hindering towards the goals? Is there a potential that through your safety reward and recognition systems, you could actually be driving the types of behaviors you actually don't want to see? I think agree on the role that safety plays in helping your organization achieve its objective, and be clear on that. So this comes back to, well, how does safety play into our strategy, and how are the behaviors that we're encouraging leaders to engage in help us to achieve our high-level goals? Get clear on your risk profile. So spend a bit of time understanding where the greatest hazards within your organizations are and dig into those. And I think using those as an opportunity to engage your workforce and understand the work that's being done is really important. Look for patterns in past incidents and theorize potential interventions. So again, you can use past data. You can look at how incidents have been categorized. You can look at the potential of those incidents, and you can look at the circumstances that led up and come up with some understanding frameworks about how, what's worked and what hasn't worked in the past. We'd really encourage you to consider quantitative and qualitative data and lead indicators within your organization. Again, is often a focus on activity without necessarily having such a strong focus on the quality of that activity. So it's one thing to, again, have KPIs around particular behaviors from your team or from your leaders, but ensuring that they've got the capability and the capacity to do those in the way that they're intended to get the best effect is really, really important. Let's say we had took pre-start meetings as an example. You might have pre-start meetings established within your organization. However, are they actually achieving the results that you want? So if you're going to be locking down groups of people for 15 or half an hour every single day to talk about the jobs to be done, I'd be really challenging you to think about, are you getting a return on investment based on the quality of those? Again, be clear about the process of collecting data, be clear about the story you want to tell from the data, and make sure that you can tell that story effectively to the board. Think about your scoreboard, and then finally celebrate success. So it's really important as you progress down this process is to recognize the wins and the successes that you've had. So we'll encourage you to engage with us and connect with us at any time to talk more about this. A big part of the questions that have come through on past webinars is about where do you start and how do you start to drive this change within an organization, particularly when it seems like so many organizations are so wedded to these ideas of lag indicators. And what we'd be really encouraging you to do is to start at the board level. Look at the types of information that the board is asking and start to educate them on the strengths and the weaknesses around the data they may be currently getting, and start to work with them to help them understand the story that will be most useful to ensure that they're managing the risk profiles of their organizations. So continuing to educate about due diligence, continuing to look at legal cases surrounding obligations of those of the members of your board, and also looking at I guess the follies of perceiving lag indicators or low lead indicators as having a safe organization are some of the key things you can start to talk about then. Once you've started that education process, you can then start to encourage organizations and the board members to really start to focus on digging into the data, understanding the data, and focusing on proactive actions, generally attached to lead indicators that can start to shift your safety culture forward. So thank you for listening in on this quick overview of lead and lag indicators and beyond TRIFR within your organization. We encourage you to get in touch with us, and we'll be more than happy to walk this through with you in more detail. Thanks and take care.